Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. Dan Luss joined this week by Mike Lawson and Landis Barber. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Dan,
Doing good. Thanks for having us on here.
I always do that. I ask the question and whoever responds first wins. So Mike, you're down. You're down 1-0.
Yeah, you gotta be more direct with those questions.
No, I don't. They're an open-ended question.
It's back-to-back weeks for me. Okay, I'm doing everything I can here.
We've put the bat signal out and you've responded, so much appreciated. So we are going to dive into it. I know. Listen, it's a busy work week. We all have busy schedules, so we'll make it work when we can. Mike, we're going to get you for as long as we can, and then Landis and I are going to land the plane on the backside. Roadmap for today: we're going to talk about Darian Mensah, the lawsuit heard round the college sports world. It was the TRO that was granted, then it was denied, and then it was kind of granted and kind of denied, and no one's really quite sure. So we have gone through the pleadings. We'll try to separate fact from fiction. We have two friends of the show that seem to be on opposite sides of what the court order says, so we will weigh in there. The 49ers with this electrical substation issue, I saw tracking kind of last week, and then when certainly there was news of George Kittle's torn Achilles, this story went super viral. And then the update this week that we wanted to cover was Adam Schefter announcing that the 49ers were actually launching a formal investigation as to whether this electrical substation is actually a cause of these injuries and the liability that could result from that. A couple of quick hitters, if we can get them in. NFL looking, is it the FBI that's looking into Jim Irsay's death?
It just says federal investigators.
I think that means FBI.
FBI.
Federal investigators.
Yeah,
looking into,
FBI and DEA.
That's what I thought. Okay. And then we're going to talk about some agent issues in the college sports ranks, some FTC guidance that we are monitoring. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the ongoing debate about whether college basketball players or really, we'll say pro basketball players can go back to college and under whether and under what circumstances, and that is the new Bediako case that is kind of bouncing around in Bama. Okay, reminder, our show is sponsored by Themis Bar Review. As we record this, it is January 23rd on Friday. The bar looms near. We got like 3 months left before you guys have to start breaking into a deep sweat. If you don't want to be stressed about it, sign up for Themis Bar Review, and you will not regret it. Top bar prep company in the galaxy. Okay. Now, Landis, that was a mouthful. Got to get it out because Mike has this hard out that we have to adhere to because Mike now runs the show. He comes on 4 weeks in a row and he gets to make the rules. I get it. Totally get it.
That's awesome.
But Landis, I thought to call you this week. Last time we had you on, we were talking about, the NASCAR case and which had a lot of bones to tie it into North Carolina. And I was kind of combing through the Twitterverse and trying to figure out the right approach to cover Mensah. And Landis, you didn't know this, but I saw you in the replies. I saw you in the replies bopping around. And I said, you know what? I forgot. Landis is a North Carolina guy. I want to get Landis back on the show. And he has some thoughts here. So, Landis, we're going to lay out. I want you to give us your impression of what has gone on. And I say that very cautiously because there are two very conflicting reports that seem to be out there on the ramification of this, we'll say the TRO or the TRO that never happened. So
yeah,
I'll leave it to you, Landis. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Duke sued Darian Mensah after Darian Mensah. Go ahead.
Why don't you lay up who Darian Mensah is? I think this is
Darian Mensah is Duke's quarterback. This year he threw for nearly 4,000 yards. I think I read earlier today that he threw something like 34 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, somewhere around there. Maybe it was 36 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. So he's really good.
Pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, that's average these days. But apparently there's some universities that are out there looking for a quarterback. And back in December, he had said that he was going to stay at Duke. He did a whole LeBron James, The Decision video, if you all ever saw it. If you haven't, you can go look it up on the Twitterverse or on the internet. And he said, I'm staying at Duke. Now, remember, he had signed a 2-year deal at Duke. So that deal continued through his recommitment to Duke University. Well, then recently he said, hey, actually, I'm going to enter the transfer portal. And he told Duke that he wanted to enter the transfer portal. And Duke said, we don't want you to do that. So to prevent him from entering the portal, they wound up suing him. and it happened this Monday, and filed for an emergency temporary restraining order. Now, this all kind of happened. Dan, I don't know if you might have woke up to it. Some of our California people were probably woke up to just a whole scramble, but it just immediately happened, and everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, what just happened?" Well, Darian Mensah's attorney came online, and he did a great job of telling.
Darian Mensah is his attorney is Darren Heitner, who has been on the show plenty of times. We know Darren very well.
Darren came on and did a great job of saying what happened, which was that the court will allow him to enter the transfer portal, but he can't transfer to any other school. In Darren's words, I think he said they're going to decide the rest of the injunction or temporary restraining order at a later date. So he said the right thing, but people wound up interpreting that the temporary restraining order was denied. And later it came out the next day when the judge released the written order that, oh, wait, the temporary restraining order was granted. So there had to be some confusion around there. I don't know if you all were confused about it, but I was a little bit confused until I saw the written order.
I'll jump in then, Mike. I want to make sure you get your word in on this. Here was the confusion, and I don't know if it's just like we used to be able to blame the lack of characters, that like, oh, I didn't have enough characters to write this, but like, in this day and age, write as much as you want, especially if you have that nice blue check mark. So I think there seemed to be confusion. I read a lot of the replies, and I think we're not telling the story appropriately unless we mention that Darren is a lawyer that has affiliations with the Miami Collective, and there are people that are dropping in the replies and saying, Darren is representing Mensah, but he's also representing the Miami Collective. The Miami seems to be, I think, for all intents and purposes, the school that has flagged Mensah as their next quarterback. They're aggressively pursuing him, all that fun stuff. So I don't think we're telling the story appropriately unless we include that. I'm not saying anything good, bad, or ugly, just pointing it out. So what Darren seemed to say is that Mensah could enter the portal. But as we kind of unpack the decision, it seemed to say that at least temporarily he was prevented from enrolling at another school. So I tell this joke in my class a lot, like, tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. If you can enter the portal, but you're not allowed to enroll in another school, like, okay, great, you entered the portal. So while two things can be true, like entering the portal might be a win, and Landis, to your point, like the battle is not yet being done, and there's a motion for re-argument. The judge had a conflict of interest. Like, I understand all of that, but I think the initial reporting that, hey, great news, we can enter the portal, did not accurately state the kind of full nature of the case. Like, so I think that's where the confusion lies. And there's another lawyer. I don't have his name. I'm happy to pull it up. Like, I've never heard of him before, but he's a Duke lawyer that's writing these treatises on this case. Landis, I'm sure you can. What's the guy's name?
David McKenzie.
Yeah, the guy's just writing treatises on these, and people are saying the same thing to him. Like, your bio says that you're a Duke guy. Like, you're completely jaded the other way. So the only thing I wanted to add, I alluded to at the top, and then Mike, I'll give it to you. Mike, you very well. You were on those initial podcasts that we had with Tom Mars once upon a time during the Big Ten sagas with Tom Mars. I'd like to say Tom is another friend of the show. I text Tom every so often. Tom very much called Darren out for, I'll say it in Tom's not his words, but his phrasing, that Darren misreported this. And then Darren is saying he didn't misreport it. There's some text being exchanged between the two, which in my little college sports world definitely was lighting up the phone line, so to speak. So, but yeah, that's where we are. And I think just by all indications, this is a very big case of a quarterback of a very high level being sued at his school to remain there. So a case that we're certainly going to continue to follow, but that's the opening framework. So Mike, you're the first one now that we've kind of laid up what's going on. Do you care to share any analysis on this?
Well, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, where we are now seeing. All right, this is kind of a culmination of we're now bridging eligibility, transfer portal, and NIL world. And the reason that this is so important for Duke is that they've paid him a lot of money when he signed the contract in 2024. Landis, it was a 2-year deal, you said, yeah?
Yes.
So we talked about this with Damon Williams with Washington, where he was like, "Oh, I'm going to transfer," and then Washington was like, "Oh, we're going to maybe sue you, or you're going to have to give us all the money back from your NIL deal." And he's like, "Just kidding. I think I'm going to stay."
Do you know it was like that Homer Simpson gif when he puts his hat on and then like he comes in the door, puts his hat on and walks back out the door?
Yeah,
it's like, exactly. I'm entering the portal, just kidding, I'm going back out.
Exactly. And then all of the newscasters in the same light were the Homer Simpson just fading back into the bushes. So, and if we want to stick to the memes here, you were talking about, what is happening with Mensah is basically what Heitner was saying, and if that's the analysis, is that it's like the Seinfeld skit where he's like, when he goes to the car rental, it's like you can take the reservation, but you can't keep the reservation. So it's like you can enter the transfer portal, but you can't go to another school. So if he loses eligibility, why we're talking about this right now is what popped up today was the emergency motion to have the eligibility to transfer, to actually enroll in another school, because his deadline is today. That would be January 23rd. So if he misses this deadline, then he is stopped from doing any sort of transfer or going to Miami. And that's the rumor, is that he's looking to go to Miami. Now, look, he signed this big deal, and now he probably, after such a great year, like Landis, like you were saying, he probably thinks he's worth more. So that's the other thing too, where he's got Miami, who's like, "Hey, we can give you a lot more money if you transfer to us." So this is just the inner workings of what we said was going to come to a head, where you have no real guidelines on NIL. The transfer portal is kind of up in the air. And then you have the athletes, rightfully so, with high values, getting paid a lot of money. Now we're in a post-house settlement world where these schools also have to think about the amount of revenue sharing that they're giving and things like that. We talked about that on the Williams side. So we haven't even talked about Duke getting money back if he does transfer, but this is just Duke trying to stop him from actually transferring. So we have a lot of things kind of spinning on its head, and we'll know more about what what happens with the emergency motion to allow him to transfer probably after today. But it's a very, very interesting world for college sports, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think that this is such an interesting. I didn't read too much into the TRO like a lot of people did. I didn't take much away from it. I think you had a judge that knew he was going to recuse himself, who ultimately did recuse himself for multiple reasons. So I tried not to read too much into what he did, but he repeatedly emphasized maintaining the status quo. He wanted to just maintain the status. And I think he did the best of both worlds there. You let him enter the portal, but he can't go anywhere. So Duke can still get its injunctive relief if a court ultimately determines that that's what's necessary. So this is a rather interesting one. As we're talking right now, I looked it up in our electronic portal platform here we have in North Carolina, eCourts, and it doesn't appear that there was a hearing scheduled for this afternoon. Now, that doesn't mean it hasn't happened, or that doesn't mean it's not going on right now as we speak, because sometimes the portal can be delayed, but I'm curious to see sort of how the judge has taken that one. The internet's been strangely quiet on this, so I agree that we'll see soon on what sort of is going on here. But I don't think, so for this emergency motion, I don't think finding out a eligibility enrollment date is necessarily new material that he couldn't have found out previously. So I'll be curious how the court treats that and whether that's an actual emergency.
Okay, I think everyone seems pretty good with that. We have time permitting, we're going to talk about another eligibility issue that I think is causing some more concerns with Bediako, but I'll just put this a fine point on the end of our Mensah discussion. We have been on the show, and I had my first class at Pace Law School today, and I've said pre-July 21 is the old era, and at some point we're going to have a new era, but we're still very much in this. Maybe we're getting out of it, but I would still call this the wild, wild west era. But, with this Mensah lawsuit, I sense that we're getting closer to some law and order. Now, I am certainly not one that thinks that we need to fight all of these battles through the court system. There has to be some other mechanism that's done internally, like the NBA does, NFL does. But I think if we are a podcast that's in favor of law and order as opposed to lawlessness, you got to watch these very closely. And, maybe these are the precedent setting cases that need to put this in motion. We had a contract we were looking at for an ACC school for my practice. And I was talking to a colleague about it, and I just having them, I was having a junior lawyer look at the buyout clause, and he's like, "Are these clauses normal?" And I'm like, "They're normal in light of some of the recent cases." So there is precedent being set and contracts being adjusted as these kind of cases come out. So I would say that's generally a positive development.
Just one final note on this, Dan, to follow up, Landis, what you were saying about no new information in the request for an emergency hearing or emergency motion. There is a line in it that says, at the time of the hearing, neither Mensah nor counsel was aware of any enrollment deadlines for collegiate institutions who have indicated their interest in Mensah's enrollment. So they are saying this is new information, that they were not aware of any sort of enrollment dates. So,
okay, all good. In the interest of time, let's roll on. So we had mentioned this interesting 49ers theory or 49ers case study that popped up. So I'll give us the quick background. Mike, I want to get your thoughts, and then I know we're dealing with it, but timeline or the deadline on your end, Landis, I will take it thereafter. So on January 6th, an individual named Peter Cowan, who is he's an EMF consultant, electromagnetic field consultant. He writes this crazy thread, and I say crazy thread because at the time it was crazy, that he went to Levi Stadium. He measured some, I think it's called missigos. I think that's the actual term, milligauss. Starts measuring things, and he has this whole thread where he goes, "I'm a football fan. I went to the stadium. Chronic exposure to electromagnetic fields will essentially, cause injuries that that will cause long-term prolonged injuries." And he said, just by the numbers, the 49ers are the most injured team in all of football in the last 10 years, and let's investigate this. So he goes and he does these readings, and he said, according to his own measurements, it looks like that we'll say this electromagnetic radiation and situation being close to the stadium is causing these injuries. That was his theory, and according to his theory, it was borne out by the evidence. And we can talk about Fred Warner or any number of high-profile 49ers that have been injured in a meaningful way over the past couple of years. So anyway, that story goes out, and I don't know if everyone saw it. It got popped up on my radar. I didn't really think twice about it. The reason the story went viral, is this individual, Peter Cowan, became kind of like worldwide news for a hot second, is because within days of putting out that theory on January 6th, George Kittle tears his Achilles and is out for the year. So timing was kind of right. The story, as I was just looking at it, has 22 million views. This guy, Peter Cowan, went on Barstool, went on Part of My Take, and the story kind of took on a life of its own. And now no one really quite knew what to make of it. I know, Mike, you are a little bit of a doubter in the theory, but the 49ers are now investigating the connection to this field. So, Mike, I'll give this to you. Landis, certainly weigh in. I started doing some research, assuming this was true, assuming the 49ers put their practice facility in Levi Stadium in an area, obviously there's coming to the nuisance and all these fun kind of legal theories we can talk about. But again, not that I'm a complete psychopath, but there are general laws around the country about providing a safe place for your employees to work, right? That's just kind of standard negligence. You owe a duty of care to your employees. And if, while I agree, and you and I spoke offline, so I know kind of what you're about to say, the causation element is tough. It's also hard to argue, why have the 49ers been the most injured team in football the last 10 years? So there's this kind of general this understanding of negligence, failure to provide a safe workplace, failure to warn, we'll say fraudulent concealment to the extent this issue has come up in the past. And you and I were talking offline, maybe people aren't quite understanding this, but if let's say there was a secret nuclear facility that for some reason nobody knew about, but the team knew about, but they put, Giant Stadium was close to a nuclear facility and guys were getting sick and, they were having issues and complications with the pregnancies with their wives, 100% going to be a lawsuit. So while causation here is still very much in doubt, there are the bones of what could be a pretty serious lawsuit here to the extent the 49ers knew about this, and obviously causation could be proved. But I thought it was an interesting enough theory, and we never talk about issues like this on the show, so I thought it important enough to bring up. Okay, so Mike, now that I've laid it out, I know you're the doubter amongst us. You're shaking your head immediately. Thoughts on this potential liability here?
First and foremost, there must be an electrical substation near the homes of every single player on my fantasy football team this year, because all of them got hurt. So if that's what's causing this, then I think they need to look into a lot more than just San Francisco 49ers. Second of all, this isn't a nuclear power plant. There was something that is substantial. This may be very true, right? But it's not something that is like scientifically proven and backed for decades, centuries, right? About the radiation that emits from a nuclear power plant versus the electrical magnetic field that comes off of a substation, right? Because if that was the case, and maybe it is, and maybe I'm just ignorant to it, there would be specific zoning laws, I feel like, for just regular old neighborhoods, right? Like not even just athletic facilities, or what about all the people who live around the stadium or near the stadium? Are they like rolling their ankles and breaking all of their ankles too? I mean, I get that these athletes are performing at a higher level and using every single fiber of their body, but I think it was thrown out there as like a haha theory of like, hey, by the way, there's this massive substation and these athletes might be getting exposed to, excessive I think they're calling it electromotive force, EMF. So excessive exposure to electromotive force. So look, I think ESPN needs to kick sports science back into gear here, and we need to start seeing what the causal relation is here, because that's really the issue that I see is you have athletes who are also subject to electrical stimulation as a part of therapeutic, exercise. You put these pads on your back to stimulate your muscles and things like that. So there's a lot of that type of exposure too that's directly placed on it. And obviously those are a much lower dose or force, if you will, of what this substation might be emitting. But I just think this is a funny theory that took off because right after it happened, George Kittle, tore his Achilles. So I think that the injuries in general in the NFL have gone up significantly, I feel like, in the last couple of years. And there was a lot of talk about like the turf that they use and the new grass and all that stuff. So there's a lot of different causations. I just don't know how you can possibly prove that somebody tore their ACL. I mean, Bosa earlier in the year tore their ACL because of an electromagnetic field. I don't know. Landis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, what's that quote that the famous football coach that went to coach soccer overseas, Ted Lasso, said? He said, that's the thing about coincidences. Sometimes they just happen. So I tend to lean towards you, Mike, and what you're saying of this is just something that happened, and I think it is convenient that an injury happened right after this was discovered, but needs some more digging into how this connects, the causal connection. Would like to see more scientific opinions on this before really weighing in on this is the exact connection.
So, a couple things, Mike. You raised a very good point before about whether like normal human beings are having other issues, right? Like, obviously, you put two and two together, and I think it's more kind of like Achilles and kind of tendons like that as opposed to like rolled ankles. But I think it's fair. And we should say Peter Cowan is like, he's somewhere between complete nobody and like expert in the field that everybody knows about. But there have been people that have tried to tear him down in the comments. But it is, I think it's worthy of an investigation, right?
Yeah.
I just think there is something to be said that the 49ers have made it publicly known that they are actually looking into it. So there must have been enough noise around the team, like internally, about this issue. So yeah, I agree, Mike, about the point you bring up about zoning and like, if we think this thing is unsafe, like why hasn't anyone brought this to our attention before? But then again, right, like the 49ers have had terrible injury luck time and time again. And it could be, right, to the point you both raised, it could just be a coincidence, right? It could just be happening. But if the team, like millions, if not billions of dollars are being spent and, there's a profit margin being lost of several hundreds of million if the team could advance further and players are healthy. So they'll look into anything and everything. in our world, like there certainly have been lawsuits with teams not providing a safe. I think it was Lawrence Tynes years ago, a kicker with the Bucks, used to play for the Giants. He was like, he was in a training room. I believe this was the case, and he picked up some type of illness from something he contracted in the training room. So like providing an unsafe workplace like is a fairly typical lawsuit. So it's not to say, and this is the nature of why we bring it up, like there's a difference between a lawsuit that will win, a lawsuit that can, in theory, be brought in good faith. And then where we're at right now is like the decision by the 49ers to tell Adam Schefter, to tell the world we're looking into this. So while Mike, Landis, you guys might have been right on January 6th, and you might have been right on the 10th. Like the 49ers could have said, we've looked into this before, and we've already ruled it out. That's not the messaging that they've committed to Schefter. Schefter said, we are looking into this and going to further investigate it, which, again, not that I'm like Mr. PR expert or anything like that, but I did work in PR for a few years for, the Giants. Like the phrasing of that is very odd if they've already looked into it and they've already ruled it out. So that's all I'm going to tell you. And I'm not predicting that there'll be a lawsuit. I'm not predicting that it will win. But I do think there is news in the fact that the 49ers are acknowledging that there is more to be looked into, that this book is not yet closed, which I think is very odd. Very odd.
I agree. And Levi Stadium, if I recall, has a natural grass field. And if you recall, some of the athletes, when athletes' Achilles injuries would happen, a lot of the blame would go on turf fields. And they can't really say that at Levi Field. So it's natural that they would look for something else. So that's, I guess, why they're looking into it and why they want to know what's going on here.
Mike's giving up. Mike agrees. We're right. He's wrong. Okay. We got 5 minutes left. Mike, let's do whichever one you want to do. Irsay or FTC. The deadline is yours. As quick as you want to be, and the deadline is as real as you want to make it.
We'll stick to the NFL for right now. This is just kind of a quick tidbit. It's more just kind of a middle of our episode, what to watch for. So Jim Irsay passed away in May of last year at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and now the FBI and DEA are opening an investigation as to the cause of that death. Now, there's been signals to his death certificate that the cause was as a result of cardiac arrest due to pneumonia. But they are also investigating a California addiction specialist who was treating Jim Irsay, specifically as it relates to opioids and ketamine. So both of which could potentially cause cardiac arrest. Now, Jim Irsay it's not like he was that old. He was 65 years old. So it's just something to look at. There wasn't an autopsy that was shown on the death certificate. So I don't know really how much deeper they can dive into this now. I don't know the actual biomechanics of the autopsy. We're talking 7-8 months past the death of Jim Irsay. So interesting to see where this leads to. I don't know what really they can do unless they get some sort of admission out of this addiction specialist that he was feeding him a ton of opioids and ketamine. I don't know. Landis, what do you got?
Yeah, one point on that, I had read that the addiction specialist at the time that Jim Irsay died, the addiction specialist was staying, I think, in the same hotel, and also the addiction specialist signed the death certificate. So that could be some things they're looking into as well.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on.
I don't have anything to add. Definitely interesting. Mike, we're up against the clock here. Okay, Mike, I'm going to give it to you. Give us your last. Give us your thoughts quickly. The FTC and Sparta, and then Landis and I will take it from there. Just lay us out. We'll take the rest. Whenever you want to hop off, you can hop off.
We'll jump right back over to college, and the rest of the episode I think is going to be a little bit college based. A lot of heavy college news this week. So the FTC has sent letters to 20 universities in regards to compliance with Sparta, Sports Agent Responsibility and Trust Act, which was passed in 2004, and it was enacted basically to ensure that agents were being compliant and operating in accordance with their treatment and I don't even know the best. Maybe it's like some sort of ethical understanding of how they have to, work with certain athletes and stuff like that. Now, I know when I was at Syracuse, a big thing is obviously athletes as they're transitioning from college to pro, the eligibility as it relates to having an agent. Now that's a lot different because we're in the NIL world. So this is kind of why this is opening up. Michael McCann wrote a really good article about this, kind of diving into the fact that Sparta hasn't really been cited on any sort of legal case or court ruling up until now. Not that now we have seen it, but now it's the FTC is kind of using this as an enforcement tool to protect college athletes. I don't think that's a bad thing personally. I think especially we're already talking about some exposure here with what's happening with Mensah and Williams and the transfer portal and NIL deals and post-house settlement. So I think now that athletes are into the realm of being treated as professionals, right? I think the term amateur is quickly gone away, and now we have athletes who are receiving revenue sharing money from the house settlement. They're getting big NIL deals from collectives. They are still impressionable youths. We talked about this with the point shaving scandal that just happened a couple weeks ago. These athletes are looking to the person who is supposed to be the expert in that field, right? So I think this is a good idea for, compliance with Sparta, is that not only do they have to adhere to the NCAA rules to be, on an agent list, but also they have to adhere to the compliance under federal law that they are not taking advantage of any sort of young professionals in college sports. Landis, what do you think?
I think this is going to get really interesting. It's a voluntary letter that the universities respond to, but they're obviously going to respond to it because it's the FTC and you don't want them to continue to poke around. However, I don't know what the FTC is going to do. We've never had any examples of it. So how are they going to treat these athlete agents and what kind of rules are they going to put in place? This is going to be a big deal. As we're seeing some agent issues pop, not to connect it back to Mensah, but there's some agent issues there. So how is the FTC going to treat this? And then what is it going to lead to with Congress and other things to the extent they want to get involved in this?
Landis, do you think that, or Dan, do you think that there's a possibility that we see sooner rather than later a players association for college athletes?
So I am of the opinion that a players association would be helpful. I'm not quite sure how quickly it will come, but something that can be policed much sooner than that is the regulations around agents. So Sparta was in place and is in place to help kind of curtail some of these issues. But as I've heard any number of people say it, in this day and age, all you need to be an agent in NIL is a Twitter bio. So there has been, I think some disregarding of Sparta. And I think the FTC is sending a message that, hey, we have Sparta on the books. We are investigating it. We are looking into certain agents. We want to hear from schools. And that's very different because agents fall certainly outside of the realm of schools and conferences and athletes. Like they're around the space, but they're not. You don't really need, some type of collective bargaining or players association in order to police the agents. You have Sparta in effect. So again, I don't really quite know. Like every time the federal government looks like it's going to do something, we spend a lot of time and energy speaking about it. The SCORE Act, the various federal legislation that popped up, and nothing really happens. So I'm going to see it when I believe it. When it comes to any federal push on the college sports world, every time we get close and every time they get motivated, something derails it. So while I think all these stories are interesting, you guys heard me in the pre-show. Do I want to cover this? Yes, I guess we'll cover it to the extent it means anything. But we've been let down time and time again of the federal government stepping in, and not that we're necessarily rooting for the federal government to involve themselves in college sports, but there has been a push for it. And the federal government, for whatever reason, threatens it constantly. And then they get right up to the water and then they turn around and go the other way. Very similar, Mike, to the Homer Simpson GIF. They put their hat on, little federal hat on, and then they pop out the door.
So just one piece on this. If everyone wants to dive into the actual act, it's 15 USC section 7801 through 7807. And again, here's the generalization of what it is. The act prohibits certain conduct by sports agents relating to the signing of contracts with student athletes. It makes it unlawful for an agent to directly or indirectly recruit a student athlete by giving any false or misleading information, making a false promise or representation, or providing anything of value to a student athlete or anyone associated with the athlete before he or she has entered into an agency contract. So a lot of this we see on the NCAA side of compliance, that's called an inducement, right? So we know that the NCAA is very strict on what is and what is not an inducement. And we've towed that line many a times on this podcast about what was happening with certain athletes. But that is effectively what this federal law is enforcing to prevent and protect student athletes. So.
Okay. With that being said, Mike, we are losing you. Thank you for continuing the streak. And see you next time. I'm not going to say it's next week because we don't know, but get out of here.
We'll say it.
Okay. Okay. In the housekeeping world, we are back. Mike is gone. It is just me and Landis for the rest of this episode. So, before I forget, as I try to be a man of his debts, I had a really nice wager that I thought would be a very big winner. I think it's Josh Allen to have like over 100 yards rushing for the playoffs. And it should have been a winner. But the refs screwed Brandon Cooks and the Bills, and the season's over. So I thought it was a good bet that I made a recommendation on last week. And I kind of forgot about it. Then I checked my bank account, my DraftKings account the next day, and it was not a winner. And then I realized it was double heartbreak. Okay. I said I want to be held accountable. My bets, Landis. Don't laugh at me. It's fine.
I appreciate your accountability and you wanting the people to care about what you're doing on the bets.
Yeah, listen, people don't have to bet it, but I did the research. The Bills should have won that game. It was a complete joke. Josh Allen reverted into like rookie Josh Allen when he was laddering the ball. Remember that? That was like the COVID year. He had these crazy laterals when he was playing the Texans in the playoffs, and I'm like, this guy is just a wild horse. Like, you never know what he's going to do. And for some reason, that Josh popped back up in that last play of the first half, which was very disappointing. And wouldn't you know, that 3 points was really the whole game. Like, if they don't run that stupid play and then McDermott's out. Actually, I have something for you. This is not on the agenda, Landis. Can we go off course for a second? Can we go off course? Did you see the Bills owner making those crazy comments about Keon Coleman? Or did you follow this?
I did. I thought that was, like many people thought, it was a bit overstepping.
Well, overstepping odd. Like we as, again, when we do a sports law show, if we just covered the lawsuits, and there was one that we're not going to cover on the show with Tristan Smith over Clemson. We're not going to cover it. I don't think it's anything particularly novel that Pavia hasn't already discussed. It's different jurisdiction, yada, yada, yada. Fine.
Still
Keon Coleman is a wide receiver that was drafted as the first pick in the second round a couple years ago out of Florida State. I think he played at Michigan State and, pretty good track record. There were guys, I think Ladd McConkey was drafted right after him or right before him. There's a couple big names in that draft. But in any event, Keon Coleman was the first pick of the second day. People are, you've got some thought into why you would pick a particular player. So I'm a Bills fan. I follow a little more closely than most. Keon Coleman had a very weird year this year. We had a lot of what we call DNP CDs. Did not play coach's decision. And he would be late for meetings and late for this and late for that. And it looked like he wasn't playing, not because the Bills didn't need him. The Bills had a ton of wide receiver issues. But just because he was having some type of discipline, mental discipline. So in any event, why we're bringing it up in this kind of weird year, no one really knew what was going on with Keon Coleman, and the Bills definitely needed a player like that, but they wouldn't play him. They fire, perhaps controversially, Sean McDermott gets fired. The Bills put out a statement that says they hit the playoff wall. They just want to change the scenery. Okay, whatever, fine. I don't really agree with it, but not a sports law issue. Okay, and then we have a very weird press conference with Terry Pegula, who's the owner of the Bills, alongside Brandon Beane, who's the GM. And seemingly out of nowhere, Pegula puts out a statement, and he says, by the way, I just want to say, Brandon Beane has been getting a lot of slack for the drafting of Keon Coleman. I just want to tell everybody that was a decision by the coaching staff, and Brandon had to do what he had to do in that situation. So very odd, because Keon Coleman is a current member of the Buffalo Bills whose contract is not expiring this year. It's very odd to have an employer talk about an employee like that in a football context. It's almost unheard of in football circles for an owner to talk about that, or even a coach. I've never really heard it. And then the sleuthing that occurred afterwards, I thought was very, again, we're lawyers, quasi-legal issues, comments about however you want to phrase it, but people found clips of documentaries where Brandon Beane was taking credit for that draft pick. So a little bit of revisionist history. I don't know, Landis. Well, before we get into the Bediako of it all to close us out, thoughts on what is going on in Buffalo? It's very odd. I don't know what
Yeah,
other way to put it.
it is very odd. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, why would he do that? And I don't know if he's using it as a motivation tactic for Keon Coleman. Certainly didn't come off that way if that's the way he's doing it. But you also saw, I think it was the next day, where when he said that was a coach's decision, he came out and said something like, I wasn't saying that that was McDermott's decision. Um, so nobody
What other
knows whose
what
decision
other
it
coach
was.
would it have been?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So it spoke to some potential dysfunction within the Bills organization between GM and coach, and whether GM, coach, and owner are all on the same page. So I don't really understand what the purpose of even getting that out there was when it wasn't a press conference about Keon Coleman. Either way, Terry Pagula decided that it was something he needed to say. So we'll see what happens with Keon Coleman this offseason. I mean, he had 400 yards last year and 4 touchdowns. That's not a bad wide receiver to have on your team. That's not a wide receiver one, but four
he's not.
touchdowns.
I don't think he can suit up for the Bills again. I think that's wild. But
I think his agency and team is probably looking for somewhere else.
yeah, ship seems to have sailed. But
Yeah.
in terms of just quasi legal stuff, like there are Bills fans that are saying like, why would you fire McDermott? McDermott is just dealing with the hand that he's dealt, and all the wide receivers fell apart. That's an issue on Brandon Beane, the GM. And maybe this is a little bit of a stretch, but certainly in our legal circles, we have negligent retention. And, it seems to be, you're saying, why would Pagula have said that, the owner of the team? And I think he said it to try to defend his GM, to try to make a statement like, hey, my GM is not the issue of why why Keon Coleman was a bad pick. That wasn't his call. So, yeah, I with some truth serum or under oath, it doesn't quite make sense. And I think it's just not true. But, here we are. And I just got a notification, Landis, that the Bills are interviewing Phillip Rivers for their head coaching position. So there seems to be some dysfunction all of a sudden.
North Carolina State legend Phillip Rivers. But whoever the coach is next year, I understand you're trying to support Brandon Beane and you're trying to throw him a bone there, but whoever the coach is next year, who's to blame if the Bills don't go to the Super Bowl next year?
Keon Coleman.
Still Keon Coleman, for sure.
Okay. With that, let's close up here with I think is an important topic, and I appreciate the research you've done on this. So, let's do it. Let's do it as in whatever way we think is appropriate. We covered a few weeks ago the story of James Najee, who was the player that Baylor was attempting to court. It was a player that had been playing in Europe professionally. He never signed an NBA contract, but famously, he was involved in the compensation that was in the Karl Anthony Towns trade. So he certainly had some value to an NBA roster, and for that player to go back just seemed kind of odd. So, Landis, I'll let you take it from there. I'm not sure we covered this on the show, but please kind of enlighten us on Charlie Baker's comments in the fallout of James Najee, and then what has happened with Bediako. I think those are probably two appropriate data points.
Yeah, sure. James Najee was drafted. So, but you're right. He went over and played in Europe, and he was traded also. And Charlie Baker, after he was granted the ability to play for Baylor this season, Charlie Baker came out and said, no, we understand. We're going to allow him to play because he's very similar to other European players. But what we're not going to do is allow a player to play that has signed an NBA contract, including a two-way contract. Now, the NCAA stuck to that because Bediako applied for reinstatement to be eligible to play in the NCAA, to be eligible to play for Alabama this season. The NCAA said, no, you signed a two-way NBA contract. You can't play for Alabama. Well, lawyers got together and did what they do, and they sought a temporary restraining order in Tuscaloosa County State Court. And of course, as we've seen with many other state court litigation, the temporary restraining order is granted, enjoining the NCAA from enforcing its rules. and allowing Bediako to play this season. And importantly, because Dan, I think you saw some Twitter people talking about this, and why doesn't the NCAA just punish Alabama by not letting them into the tournament? Well, in the temporary restraining order, it kind of addresses that to say, you cannot retaliate against Alabama by withholding them from postseason competition or doing other things like that. So now we have a two-way player. Najee was a drafted player, and everybody was like, when's it going to happen? Where are we going to draw the line? Somebody else is going to challenge this, and now we have a two-way player that is going to suit up for Alabama. And it seems like the line keeps moving, even though the NCAA said no. Courts are continuing to be involved in this, and the line's going to continue to move until we have probably an NBA player coming back to college.
What was the name of the football player you were telling me about offline?
Nathaniel Salmon, I think was his name, or Salmon. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but he was through the International Pathways program, and he actually suited up in minicamp for the Los Angeles Chargers, and now he's going to play for Washington State this season. So you've kind of seen a little bit in football. It's more like the Najee situation than this situation here because he didn't sign a professional contract, but you've kind of seen a little bit in NCAA football as well.
So I'll let's do Bediako, and then I'll do what's his name, Salmon.
Yeah, I think that's his name.
Any relation to Tim Salmon, former center fielder for the Angels?
No clue. We'll have to ask him. Maybe we could get him on the show one day.
Probably not related. Maybe like a distant European cousin, but probably
could be. You never know.
Probably not. Okay, so Bediako is the other interesting case. So I certainly have an issue with a player playing professional, and that term professional, we'll get into it momentarily, means something in a I don't know how else to phrase it other than like it means something in the immigration sense. It means something in like money in your pocket. It means something in level of competition. It means something in your profession. If you're a student, there's a lot of ramifications to that. So we have seemingly said, and I get Charlie Baker's statement of coming out and saying, we're not going to prove anyone a 10-day contract. We can obviously point out the hypocrisy in that, but I'm not sure I agree with the Najee decision. But anyway, here we are, European player. I'm not really sure what makes Europe different than the G League.
I agree.
We have players getting compensation to play. You could tell me that the level of G League competition is, equivalent to overseas. Maybe overseas is better, but not quite sure if there's a difference, right? If you're being able to make money and that's considered your full-time profession and you're no longer a student, I'd consider you a professional, right? You're making the G League players aren't playing for free. So, okay. Now we go over to the Bediako situation when you have a player that has played in the G League and has signed a two-way contract. So I'm putting this in quotes. Signed a two-way contract allows you on a limited basis to play in the NBA. I would say it's somewhere between like a September call-up in baseball and like it's probably higher than the practice squad in football. There's probably no equivalent to this in football. But you're like temporarily on the roster. You're not getting paid that much. It's not a full-time player, but it's a level beyond just like being on the practice squad or being in the minor league. You're on the team on a very limited basis. So I would have thought playing professional in Europe was the decider that like, okay, I played professional in Europe. You're not allowed to play quote unquote amateur or college basketball. Not the case. So now we have a player that played in I don't know what else you call the G League other than a professional league.
Right.
You call it a minor league. It's fine. It's not an amateur league. He's played, correct, Landis? He played in the G League for some extended period of time?
He played in the G League as recently as like a week ago.
Okay. We have him playing in the G League. He has signed a contract. We have Charlie Baker saying, well, if you sign a contract, you're out. That's our line. So to me, this seems like there is no line, and we are just going to keep pushing this further and further. And then we're going to say, well, now we're going to make it like service time in Major League Baseball. You have to spend 248 days on a Major League roster, and then it'll count. I just think the line is completely nonsensical. And, where I told you I wanted to mention with this guy Salmon, I'm doing some work in the arena football context, and we're dealing with visas and some other fun stuff. And the question that comes up is, is the player an amateur player? Or are they a professional player? If they're an amateur, there are very different rules concerning, visa status or certain other technical difficulties concerning a player's eligibility to play versus professional. And I would think, call a spade a spade. Professional is when that is your deriving income. I don't know where you want to draw the line.
Your occupation, yeah.
Right, where the league is derived of other professionals that are not amateurs, and we're defining amateurs by their ability to obtain income.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're paid not in NIL, not in their name, image, and likeness, but they're paid because of their performance.
Right.
So I would think both Najee and Bediako fit that criterion of having already turned pro. So I'm not comfortable predicting where the line is at this point, and I am just comfortable in saying that the line is floating as to wherever the NCAA wants to move it, whenever they want to move it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the NCAA kind of backed themselves down into this corner when they started allowing G League players. They weren't the first ones. They're just following the path. And so coaches are like, hey, I need a new player this season. Why don't we go give it a shot? I mean, why not at this point? Bediako wants to return to college and he wants to make some more money, and Alabama could use somebody. So I don't think there's really a line. I agree with you because it has just become, you've got international professional players, you've got other G League players that are in. So it's a problem, but the door was opened and people are now taking advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else to cover on it. Like if people are wondering where you and I stand, it's like I think there has to be a door that is foreclosed at a certain point. There has to be, right? Like if you win an NBA title and you play less than 10 minutes during the season, but you get a championship ring, like, well, is that okay? Because you only played 10 minutes, but you were on a minimum NBA contract. Like, I don't know. Like if a player, Landis, played, and I'm making this example up, but you'll see where I'm going with it. Let's say we have a guy that played 5 years in the G League. He signed 3 two-way contracts. He's been like 5 years removed from college. He has additional eligibility left, but he's just kind of floating around the space. And he goes, I want to go back to college. So we have that guy, right, who seems to fit the Bediako profile. He played for a significant amount of time, signed a two-way contract. Fine. Or we have someone like Bronny James, who had eligibility left, but was playing not on a two-way contract, was playing on a legitimate Lakers contract. And I get it. It's a little bit different. It's Bronny. But let's say Bronny didn't play. And he was like the old Darko Milicic, like the human victory cigar. He played like 1 minute a game, and he only played in like 5 games. So we have a player that's played, I'm making this up, 5 minutes at the NBA level, but on a contract, on a real minimum salary contract, versus a guy that's played 5 years in the G League on multiple two-way contracts, has been at camp and practices with teams for years and years and years. Under the current NCAA framework, Bronny James, who's played 5 minutes for 5 seconds in 5 different games, touched the ball twice, he's not allowed back to school because he signed a pro contract. But, Mr. Bediako or anyone else, just because they didn't reach the NBA pro level means that they can go back. I just think that's a completely arbitrary line. Like Luka Doncic played professionally in overseas. He played at a high level. They won the NBA. They won the overseas. I think he was with Real Madrid once upon a time. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but like there was a very high level of basketball. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. The line doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, I mean, the NCAA would tell you neither can play just because they sign contracts. The problem is that's where judges, I think, are having trouble, because how can you say that against one player? I think you're pointing out the real issue of how can you say that for one player versus this other player. So then it just becomes about getting in front of the right judge.
Well, and then we lead to this larger point, and we don't have to belabor it for too long, but it's like, okay, so now we've said the NCAA has no idea what they're talking about. They're making up the rules as they go. And yes, it's just about getting in front of the right judge. I think the NCAA needs to have some teeth to their system. And the problem is no one is whatever the NCAA says, there's going to be someone somewhere. And I will not say anything bad, but there are a growing voice that these lawsuits are hurting the framework, and they're not allowing, and maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but it's not allowing the NCAA to have any stranglehold, because anytime they make a decision left, right, down, up, backwards. They will be an agent somewhere, and you certainly can't blame them for it, but an agent somewhere that will try to maximize their clients' earnings and will say, hey, let's go back to school. Let's force the issue. And Landis, it's come up twice now. If you get the Alabama judge or the Duke judge, like you get the right judge on the right day, and you'll be changing college case law. I think it's woefully unfair for courts to be deciding these issues, but absent some type of federal willingness to hop in or some buy-in on the participation agreement for all schools to agree to some third party, be it NIL Go or otherwise, like this is the reality we're living in indefinitely. And I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel short of some type of unionization, which Mike alluded to before. But for some reason, we've kind of stalled out on the unionization question ever since we made some real progress with Dartmouth, and obviously USC but no more.
I agree with you. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see unionization happening anytime soon. That's not to say people can't work towards it, and I hope I'm wrong, but I see just more and more litigation as people try to figure out what the parameters are and try to figure out who's going to step in to do something about it.
Okay. Landis, great job. Love having you back. We always appreciate you. And I don't have anything else, Landis. Do you have anything else in closing that we didn't cover?
No, I think we covered it all. It's been a busy college-heavy week, and it will continue to be college-heavy next week, as actually I saw during this podcast while we were recording that the Mensah hearing has been moved up to next Friday. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. No ruling on how it turned out, no ruling from the judge, just that it's been moved up to next Friday. So it'll be past his enrollment date. I don't know what they're going to argue about that, but that's up for them to decide.
Well, we've learned in another iteration of the podcast that you don't actually need to transfer in the portal, and there seem to be no ramifications for not transferring in the portal. Not going to get into that whole spiel again, but yeah, that's not legal advice. That's just what was the guy's name? What was the guy's name from Wisconsin? Do you have it?
That was Xavier Lucas.
Yes. And if memory served, he played in the national championship game.
Yes, he did. He was also suspended for the first half, wasn't he? And then played in the national championship.
Well, suspended for the first half, not because he didn't transfer through the portal for reasons unrelated.
It wasn't some injunctive relief.
Yep. Okay, if that makes you more confused, that's totally fine, because here we are. In any event, that will do it for us here. Listen, we don't make up the news. We just try to cover it as best we can. Sometimes there are no answers. And the times we're here just to be as confused as you as to where the line is. But all we can do is react and try to analyze in real time with what we have. That'll do it for us here at Conduct Detrimental. Thank you, Landis. Thank you to Mike Lawson. And thank you to our immortal executive producer, Mike Kravchenko. With that being said, we will see you next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.